and welcome to Darker Days Radio episode 28. Tonight, I'm joined by Chris. How are you, Chris?
Hello, I'm good, as always. Yeah, things are great. How are you?
Pretty good. Forgot to introduce myself. My name's Mike. Hi. All right, so we've got a interesting episode tonight because Mark, some family stuff came up, so he had to take care of that instead. So we're having another filler, flying by the seat of our pants kind of episode. But I think it's going to be pretty good. We'll be discussing storytelling and, storytelling.
Cool. So, I guess first thing to start with is White Wolf News.
Yep, let's go hop on over to that segment. So, for White Wolf News, they've been putting out some new products lately. First off, on Drive-Thru-RPG, we found the Fearmaker's Promise compilation, which is a PDF bundle, and it's also a softcover POD product that you can pick up in stores. It's got the Fearmaker's Promise SAS, the Rose Bride's Plight SAS, and the pre-made Changeling characters. Now, Chris, you said that you've checked out Rose Bride's Plight, correct?
It's quite a cool thing to make use of, and I think it's useful beyond Changeling itself. It's a bit different as far as many of the other SAS products they've put out. Jess Hartley is the writer behind it, and she starts off with a discussion of how you put together a murder mystery and how that influences the structure of the story you are telling. So, in a normal SAS, you have a kind of a number of different scenes that are strung together. In the Rose Bride's Plight, it's more nebulous, and so you have numerous different connections between these scenes. And the way you get between one scene to another depends upon the players following a certain course of questioning. So in that way, it fully emulates a murder mystery game that you might play as a dinner party game with friends. So I really like it, and I think it can be. You could take that model and apply it to really any of the World of Darkness games. I think they should do more like that. They're quite great.
And of course, there's the Forsaken Chronicler's Guide, which now has all 4 parts out and available. I have not read any more of that since talking to David Hill, so I should probably get on that. But definitely looks cool, and people seem to be really enjoying it. And it's bringing a lot of activity to the Werewolf the Forsaken community, so that's always great.
Ah, cool.
And next up, they actually put out for Free RPG Day a 66-page booklet called Nightmare on Hill Manor, which is really outstanding because it has a very good summary of the new World of Darkness rules.
I was astounded by how much of the rules are in there.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
There's loads.
And then it's got a story in there and pre-made characters, so it's really everything you need all in one place, which is just great, astounding, as I said before.
It's a really cool, creepy little story. Again, it's quite a tight little story, taking place within just a single location. I think when I had a brief look through it, it was kind of reminiscent of some of the better stories in, say, in ghost stories. In particular, say, the Terrible Tale of James Magnus, which is a particular favourite. So it has the same kind of vibe as that. So you could easily play it in a single session, I think. And I'm sure I will make use of it in my own games as well.
Cool. Yeah, looking through it, I just had one complaint. And that's one of the characters had Kung Fu.
Ooh.
Just come on. I mean, actually, that's one of my main complaints with the World of Darkness core book. There doesn't seem like there's enough merits for a regular person. There's a bunch of combat merits. There's a bunch of, like, just really, like, over-the-top merits. But there's not enough if you just want, like, a kind of regular schmo, I guess.
Yeah, I guess I would have to agree with that because you look at the list of merits and then you're kind of forced taking these things that are a little bit too, not run of the mill. And really, the fun of playing World of Darkness is playing a bunch of mundane people where they're all gonna die. Um, quite frankly. Yeah, I mean, it's especially difficult. I mean, you say it's difficult. It's even more difficult if you're, say, wanting to run a Mortals game set in the UK, and suddenly all those firearms merits are really kind of
Mm,
useless.
yeah, that's very true. And beyond that, we've got V20. Hey, Chris, did you get V20?
No, I didn't have the money for it, and yeah, I'm playing too much New Order Darkness.
Oh, that's
I'm sure
fine.
I'll pick up the PDF at some point. Yeah.
I understand. Good thing Mark picked it up, right?
Yeah, wherever he is.
Yep, good, good.
He can tell us all about it. I think I think the thing that I've got my eye on getting is numerous books for Vampire: The Dark Ages. So I mostly have to end up having the V20 PDF just to have certain bits of information in that or rules which would be useful for just doing Dark Ages Vampire.
That's true. Yeah, it is gonna be cleaning up the system, which would be very good, and it's gonna have
Yes.
new rules for the Salubri, and
Hmm.
their
The
discipline.
Tremere.
Obia has changed a lot.
Yeah. So there's good. Yeah. It'll be a good cleanup and I've already got the Vampire, the Dark Ages core book. So,
Hmm.
yeah, V20 just to use it to clean up the system because even Vampire, the Dark Ages was a bit had various issues with its own rules.
Yeah, I gotcha. Anyway, let's move on over to the mailbag segment.
Whoa, you forgot an item.
I did. Oh, I
Glimpses of the
did.
unknown.
Yeah, well, it's not in the show notes.
Ah,
Okay, Glimpses of the Unknown. Just came out yesterday. I have not purchased it or read it. It's 50-page PDF for $7 US, which is,
yeah.
pretty good deal compared to other White Wolf prices. So, Chris, have you checked it out?
I'm not. I haven't yet, but I'm definitely in the mood for picking it up because it has stuff for all of the World of Darkness. So I need to have it. It has story seeds and plot lines for every World of Darkness line. It has new rules, new merits, new powers, and setting material, and even has ideas to do linked with customization of World of Darkness. So there's more rules for innocence and mirrors.
Yeah, I was pretty astonished by that.
I mean, it's interesting because it talks about, in its description, it talks about that some monsters reject the classifications we attempt to brand them with. So I think again, it's a book of rules tweaks to again just keep World of Darkness fresh and strange and mysterious for the players.
Yeah, definitely. I'm interested in seeing some more like information about it because as it stands right now, it just seems like it's a random smattering of rules for well, pretty much everything from
Hmm.
Promethean to Geist to Innocence.
Yeah, it's a big book of everything, and if unless you play everything and have most of the books for everything, then it may not be the type of thing to go out and buy. I don't know. It could have been nice maybe if they may do it. They may break it up into individual kind of $1 segments for each of the game lines, but
Mm.
first of all sell it as a whole compendium to begin with. So we'll see what happens with that. But I'll tell you about it when I've got it, which will be as of I think tomorrow because I get paid.
All right, great. So now let's move over to the mailbag segment. So, uh, we got a lot of mail following the last couple episodes, and we're not going to cover all of it because that would just take up too much time. But there's a few key things that came up. First off, Laughing Hyena left a comment on our Podbean site about all of the werewolf fiction, because she's read all of it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
In particular, it was mentioned that most of the HarperCollins stuff is terrible, except for Werewolf Watcher. That one is it takes place in the gaming convention that Fenris Lorstray mentioned in the previous Rage episode. That's supposed to be a pretty good one. And the Tribe novels are very good. It's a 7-novel series covering each of the 13 werewolf tribes and the Black Spiral Dancers, and a series of novellas. And in particular, the tribe novel Uktena is supposed to be very good.
Cool.
Yep. And other than that, the novel Silver Crown, which Fenris again mentioned, is supposed to be great. So it's good to see that they're in agreement in regards to the werewolf novels. And yeah, definitely check it out if you're interested.
What else have we got then in the mailbag?
Well, we also got a message from LifeTap, who's actually an EVE player who wants to dig into the lore of the World of Darkness. And I mentioned to him that source books are the best way to get into it, because they contain all the information. But he was a bit more interested in fiction. So, kind of like we mentioned in the World of Darkness fiction episode, I recommended for Old World Vampire, you should check out Predator and Prey Vampire by Carl Bowen. And for New World of Darkness, I recommended A Hunger Like Fire by Greg Stolze.
Yes.
Good. And finally, Fanboy left us a message recommending the Dresden Files for New World of Darkness inspiration. And I have to say, live on the air, I completely disagree.
I have no idea about the Dresden Files. I'll be utterly honest there. I've not watched the series, not picked up the books. So give me some insight on... I understand a little about what it's about, but what's so bad about the novels then, would you say?
Bad about the novels? They're great! They're hysterical!
Right, okay. You're saying they just don't fit World of Darkness in theme.
Precisely. Harry Dresden he's a wizard, a professional wizard. He's got his office that says he's a professional wizard. But he's kind of like Spider-Man if he was a wizard. You know, he cracks jokes during battle and things never go right for him. He's that kind of a character.
A bit too... from what you're saying, it's a bit too light-hearted. I mean, if I was to suggest anything for something in that vein for World of Darkness, I'd be looking at, like, say, Hellblazer, the John Constantine comics, because they're not the film's useful, but maybe not as useful because it's Judeo-Christocentric. But again, it's maybe a bit darker than Dresden Files then, and fits World of Darkness better.
Cool. But if you are looking for some pretty good kind of urban fantasy sort of fiction, it's definitely very good. First novel is Stormfront, so you might want to check that out.
And what else do we have in the mailbag then?
That's just about it. As I mentioned before, we had plenty of messages, and I think we're going to be covering some of the ideas presented to us in future episodes and storyteller segments and the like. So definitely stay tuned in the future. And with that, Chris, I think we should move on over to the secret frequency.
Oh, yeah.
It's under the stairs. I want my mom.
Tonight, we present the death of William Mackenzie and the strange structure surrounding it. Mackenzie lived from 1794 to 1851, working much of his life as a construction contractor throughout Europe, designing canals in Liverpool and Glasgow, as well as railways throughout the country. Before his death, Mackenzie contracted the construction of a stone tomb unlike any other in England, and it still stands to this day. The structure is in the shadow of a decayed church whose roof collapsed over 30 years ago, and the plaster is worn, revealing the cracked brick walls. It stands in a cemetery, dwarfing the weed-strangled headstones of less flamboyant characters. This tomb is a 4-sided pyramid constructed of basalt, a black sea stone, standing over 12 feet above the ground. On each side, only a few yards away, is a tall black obelisk with an inscription on its base. While everything surrounding the pyramid seems to be in disrepair, the structure seems untouched. Only the copper crest has corroded, losing its sheen and turning a pale green. Local legend purports that Mackenzie, a notorious gambler, had made a pact with the devil to win a game of cards in exchange for his soul. Mackenzie, seeking to save himself later, had himself buried not in the ground, but standing up straight in his pyramid tomb, holding the same winning hand of cards. The legacy of William Mackenzie provides a number of plot hooks for your World of Darkness game. Perhaps it wasn't the devil, but one of the Fae who made a pact with the enigmatic engineer. Perhaps the tomb is reinforced by cold iron, and his keeper is held at bay. Now, strangely enough, William Mackenzie never even went to Egypt, and he died before the sort of Egyptology craze swept through the Victorian aristocracy. So why did he build a pyramid? Perhaps he was a ghoul in the employ of a Setite, opposed to Prince Mithras of London. His tomb may actually be a passage to the unfinished Liverpool tunnels still below the city. Perhaps William was embraced a vampire and sleeps within the tomb in torpor. Now, surely no sane kindred lies so unprotected, but what if he's Tremere? His thaumaturgical rituals will keep the mortals away, and the pyramid structure serves as a warning to his fellow Canaanites. And what about the new World of Darkness Tremere? Could William Mackenzie have made a pact with one of the soul-sucking liches? Perhaps the pyramid was constructed on a locus, with the spiritual energy forming an invisible barrier between the stone obelisks. And finally, why a pyramid? In modern culture, it is a symbol associated with evil. From pyramid schemes to mummy movies, to being an Illuminati symbol on the dollar bill. Is William Mackenzie's tomb a symbol or something far more diabolical? You decide. So that was submitted by Jay Malkavian on the old WGPRN forums. Luckily, we saved this article submission so that we could, use it later in a secret frequency like this. So, Chris, do you have any ideas about this, or could you shed any more light on spookiness in Liverpool?
Well, with a brief search, as you said, you mentioned Liverpool's strange tunnels constructed by a Joseph Williamson around about the same time. So the idea of it being some sort of entrance into the caverns below is quite cool. A nice idea there. But really, what would they have used the tunnels for? Even why was this pyramid constructed? The idea that he was that Mackenzie was buried sitting at a card table holding a perfect hand that's such a great image that can be used in so many ways. The first thing that springs to mind that may be applicable is a character in a small SAS supplement for Geist the Sin Eaters, which was Dead Man's Hand, which is to do with a ghost and gambling for people's souls. So you can go down that route, and of course, a wonderful pyramid-like construction like that would be a wonderful gateway to the underworld. Be it you're playing Geist, or if you're playing Wraith, even. It could be one of those what they call the Avernian gates in Geist. As you say, it could be sat on a locus. or it could also be a powerful dragon's nest if you're playing Vampire the Requiem and your character's an Ordo Dracal and realizes that this tomb is the perfect place to perform a chrysalis, so they can gain control over their body and further their coils of the dragon. You mentioned the Tremere of Old World of Darkness, and that immediately made me think about trying to remember the full name of the bloodline of vampires in Requiem, the architects of the Monolith, I believe.
Yes, you are correct. Yep.
And they're the ones that have to do with making modern structures and using the structure of the city for their own purpose. And so, again, it could be related to that. It could well be the tomb of one of those vampires, and they sleep there at night. What else comes to mind? The design of it. Maybe it's related to Mummy the Resurrection. Something really simple like that. It could well be a place where, again, a gateway into the duat and so where resurrected mummies can go back and forth to replenish their soul. Trying to think of another thing that I was going to say then. I was also along the same line. Maybe it's a place of learning and a focal point for Prometheans, especially for the Osiran lineage of Prometheans, which would explain the whole pyramid structure before the pyramid craze.
I like that one a lot, actually. That's very good. Yeah.
Even worse would be if it was an Assyrian Pandoran asleep. So the entire pyramid is a Pandoran waiting to wake up. That would be ultra creepy.
Definitely.
Or it could well be the tomb of a tomb of a Seers of the Throne. It is a physical manifestation of the Iron Pyramid, the very structure of power the Exarchs have over reality and humanity. And it remains there because it is forever being. It's maybe a linchpin in the cage of reality, and it's up for the Atlantean mages to recognize it for what it is and use it against the Exarchs. It may well even be a gateway to the higher realms. Or what other games could be playing? I think that kind of covers my brief idea diarrhea there. It's all spilled out of my brains for you to play with. You got any other ones then, Mike?
Not particularly, but I was trying to think of how you can actually really put this into your game. It's definitely a bit of an enigma, a mystery for your characters to explore. But I think we're actually getting some kind of interesting ideas on how it could be a base of operations. Maybe perhaps there's a further structure below it, where, as you mentioned, there could be a Promethean, which is kind of fits because there's all these decayed buildings around it. It's not a place that people tend to go to. It's also considered one of the most haunted sites in Liverpool, apparently. So people do tend to stay away from it.
If you're going to say a base of operations, again, look at the structure of it. It could be beneath it could be the location for where a seer of the throne's pylon meets and organizes. Or I was going to say with regard to mage again, it could be a mundane representation of a gateway to a temple of Atlantis. The very cage of reality the Exarchs created means that many of the old temples are kind of hidden and look rather mundane, and it may well be this pyramid is actually a lot far older than it appears to be. Or maybe the gateway was just waiting to be made by Mackenzie. A bit of time magic could have been involved. And then the card games thing, again, like as you said, with the idea of one of the Fae being involved with this kind of pledge, this pact, which of course Mackenzie had a good way of getting out of. Maybe it's the river. Were you saying that it was that the tomb could have been a place for Mackenzie to be safe away from the Fae? It could well be one of the Fae is trapped within the structure.
That's a good turn on it. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, then you get into the fact that there may well be, however many other pyramid structures are there like it around the world, which are not Egyptian in their origin. And when I say not Egyptian in their origin, they're not overtly influenced by Egypt.
Well, interestingly enough, there's actually some pyramids that look just like this. These small tomb pyramids called Deir el Medina. I'm not sure exactly where they are, but they look very similar. So it's possible that William Mackenzie maybe perhaps had a vision, let's say, of these tombs and then created one in its likeness for himself.
Well, if you want to go down that route, you could kind of play. You could pull that all together to create a story very similar to the one that they present in, again, going back to Mage: The Awakening. In the back of the Boston Unveiled book, there's the whole storyline of what's the name of the demon?
Prince of the 100,000 Leaves?
Yes, and you know how it's all about that's about the idea of an alternate history that could have been played out. And every time there's any form of this magic done with pieces of this book, which shouldn't be, more and more of that history comes into being. And that's where all these creatures come from. They're coming from this alternate timeline, this alternate reality. An idea I had, which I may still may well use for Geist if I run Geist based in New York, is the idea of a that was to do with a ghostly mage, but you can still use the idea that all these similar pyramid tombs are actually all part of a grand plan over time, so that when they're all put in place, an idea of an alternate geography of the world comes to being. This this abyssal reflection of our world. So each time one of these tombs is created or perfected, we're one step closer to some dramatic cataclysm occurring, and that brings us more into line with this other reality where horrible, imbecile creatures exist. And every time these tombs are created or tinkered with or damaged, these creatures, breach into our reality.
That sounds pretty out of control.
Yeah. My whole idea for Geist was basically having a mad ghostly mage, because you can have ghostly mages in Mage: The Awakening, so why not for any game have a ghostly mage, and they're still working towards their goal. And I thought that was a perfect antagonist for Geist, and it could be a perfect antagonist in, say, a game like Orpheus or in Wraith or anything really where the characters are able to deal with ghosts. The idea that this mage is trying to cause a series of catastrophic events that would cause. My idea was kind of like a eastern seaboard kind of San Francisco fault line occurring. So, as I say, the idea of an alternate reality, I thought of an alternate timeline. I thought of an alternate geography, because I was working on the idea of what would a demon do that wasn't linked with time but linked with matter do. And they would want to adjust the world in a more material sense to fit itself, rather than adjust the timeline to fit itself.
It wouldn't be that hard either. There's a fault line running right down where the Connecticut River is.
Yeah, or you could do something more crazy, which is the island off the coast of... there's an island off the coast of Africa, which half the island is basically barely held on, and if it fell away, that half the island would fall down such a sheer drop that the amount of water it would displace would cause a tsunami in the Atlantic. So...
yes, I'm familiar with that. Interesting. Yeah. Well, we're getting a bit away from the original Secret Frequency topic.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll be done with this segment and move on to whatever we're going to call this next segment, which is Gothic Storytelling.
World of Darkness 2.0.
So, what is Gothic fiction, Chris? I was wondering what you're going to say to this question.
What is Gothic fiction? I would say, of my understanding, is fiction that features and revels in the darker sides and elements of the world, society, and the way we live. So rather than be repulsed by horrible things that happened, or be, I guess to me, the best example of Gothic is you see the beauty in something as it's decaying, which is why, in some respects, maybe one of the most Gothic places you could say, many places in Europe. Again, one of my favourite places, which is again quite Gothic, I would say, is Venice. I mean, the beauty is watching the place decay, and that imagery features heavily within Gothic stories and are a physical manifestation for what is going on to the characters within those stories, which is they are some way being the stories about maybe even the beauty of their corruption or their descent, their fall.
Oh,
So that's what I see with Gothic.
yeah, actually, that's a pretty good description of it. Speaking from a bit of a historical standpoint, Gothic literature originally was kind of an offshoot of the Romantic literature, which had started up in around the Renaissance. I believe the first real Gothic novel considered Gothic is The Castle of Otranto, which I've listened to as an audiobook. I would recommend checking it out that way because you can get it for free in the public domain. And
Cool.
it's really hard to read because of the old-timey English, but it's a bit easier to listen to someone say it. It's easier to follow that way. Now, these early Gothic stories were typically about the hero saving the princess, basically. It was very similar to what you see in romantic fiction. But the hero would, let's say, be assaulting this devilish castle and would encounter these very dangerous challenges that would shake his faith and shake his own morality. Now, as we go later down the road with Gothic literature, instead of being able to save the princess, sometimes he fails. Sometimes he has to give up. And you start exploring this even darker side to the characters. You can see that become even more pronounced when the more supernatural elements come into Gothic literature later on, with the likes of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and with Dracula and all these others, where you have the anti-heroes, you have the very flawed protagonists opposing those anti-heroes. So yeah, I think your description is pretty good, and even fits with the historical context. Now, how does this affect the world of darkness? And what I think we're going to be looking at is starting off with the very early editions of, say, Vampire the Masquerade, and then looking as everything progresses and then goes on to the new world of darkness. So, just looking at, say, first edition Vampire, its influence from Gothic literature is pretty pronounced. For example, in A World of Darkness, the 1992 sourcebook, Count Zaroff is one of the NPCs in the book. And Count Zaroff is actually a fictional character from the short story The Most Dangerous Game. He is the lord of this island where he hunts animals, and growing bored with that, he hunts people. And this sailor gets shipwrecked on the island and is eventually hunted by the Count. And you can also see Gothic figures being brought in. For example, John Dee, the sorcerer from the Elizabethan court, is another such character. In Vampire the Masquerade First Edition, you've got the very Gothic elements just being taken wholesale from existing fiction and literature. And then you also have the punk elements, which I feel were much more injected by the young misfits over at White Wolf as they were writing these books.
Yeah, I think that's quite telling of when Vampire the Masquerade was written, and maybe the people at the time, the age that they were when they were writing it. I think it comes across with that. So, do we want to say something then about how how the punk elements and the gothic elements really combine in Vampire the Masquerade? Because that really sets the tone then for the rest of the World of Darkness, doesn't it?
Well, I think that I'm not even sure how much they really combine, because for the very, very straight up punk elements, you have, let's say, the Anarchs, and then more gothic comes in with the Camarilla, with the elders who lord over their mortal and immortal subjects, if you will. So they really are kind of separate in many ways.
Yes.
Mostly the younger are the punks, and then you get more gothic with the older, is how I typically say it, especially with earlier Vampire the Masquerade. We're saying like first and second edition.
Well, the important thing is, I think the gothic and the punk are at two different ends of the same thing. So the gothic element in Vampire the Masquerade is kind of like the old things that have survived into and are decaying and still decaying and exist in this dying age, because of course Vampire the Masquerade has the end of the world is coming. And so the punk element, it represents the more modern, reactionary vibe towards, again, that millennial fever that the end times are coming. And so they're really two different reactions to the same kind of thing. One has got there very slowly and slowly crumbling, and it's about the inevitability of what's going to occur and the ennui of their state, whereas the punks are trying that one last kind of blowout, that one last party at the end of time, essentially. So they're really at the opposite ends of this thing, which is this dying world. Because often people get confused by what the punk in Gothic punk really means, and the punk is about extremity and about fighting against the establishment in whatever form that establishment takes, and fighting against it can happen in many ways. It doesn't mean just go around like punks who are anarchy in the UK style.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And it's interesting how when you get to the new World of Darkness, you see those punk elements start to fade, replaced by a lot more of those gothic elements. In particular, it's interesting to see that Vampire the Requiem is taglined as a storytelling game of gothic horror.
It's modern gothic horror, I believe. You're right when you say that the punk element has died off, because I think one of the things that had to be accepted, and that White Wolf accepted when they wrote Requiem, is that they couldn't really riff off that, the millennium is coming, Y2K and all those things that have been building up for, that they were working towards, and they could really play off. And I think, if anything, Requiem's modern gothic is, if anything, even closer now to being truly dystopian, and more towards the kind of Blade Runner style dystopia, because it's now that slow march into this future, and this future is still, there's the ennui the elders have of going into this future, but to them it's more of the same. And for the youth, it's more that they're scared of going on into a future that's going to be no different to their past. And especially with how quickly technology is progressing, we already can see some of the future coming, and the idea of we don't want to lose that to the ever pervasive kind of elders of our past. We want something new, but it mostly won't happen. I think that's where the dark element is, the gothic element. And even worse is that maybe all this moving into the future isn't going to make things better. We're still going to have these crumbling cities, And if I was to describe the difference, if I was to paint a picture of two cities from Vampire the Requiem and Vampire the Masquerade, Vampire the Masquerade, for me, if I was to take the same city even, if I was to take Manchester, which I've run many games for, Manchester in Vampire the Masquerade is Victorian red brick buildings and also old crumbling churches, and in amongst that, concrete city blocks of, the from 50s, 60s, 70s, and in these tall concrete blocks you would also have your anarchs, and there'd be like, or similar kind of punkish elements would be there, and you have that very you have that form of contrast. Whereas I would paint a different picture for Requiem, which is where you contrast the old red brick buildings and what churches remain, and you remove those concrete buildings and you reclad them now in steel and glass, and they're both oppressive, they're both dark, but the feel of the two is very different. I think one is more Big Brother's watching you than the other.
Yeah. Now, Chris, you touched on something which I was going to bring up later. There's actually a reason why I picked the pyramid as this week's secret frequency. Now, atmosphere is huge for horror, and especially Gothic literature. And one of the best ways to build that atmosphere is with buildings. Exactly what you were describing. The reason why it's called Gothic literature is because the original writer of the Castle of Otranto, I can't remember the name of at this point in time, he named it Gothic literature because he had a respect and fondness of the old Gothic churches, which in fact, as most people know, they had the very tall windows just to let more light in and to make them brighter. But it has a very unique and peculiar construction style. So beyond that, we've been talking a little bit about Vampire here, and the evolution that we've seen, going from first edition up to Vampire the Requiem, which is a separate game, but changes things definitely. Now, Werewolf, going from first edition Apocalypse and moving up to Werewolf Forsaken, while not commonly seen as Gothic in nature, has definitely changed drastically. As we remember in Apocalypse, there is the ongoing war between the worm and the wild, and Gaia, the earth itself, is at stake. And now with Werewolf Forsaken, they removed that instant conflict, which I think leaves a lot of storytellers a little bit confused as to how they're supposed to approach it. But Forsaken takes a similar theme of corruption and decay, but just makes it more subtle. Now, rather than the servants of the worm building factories everywhere, there's a subtle pollution of the mortal world coming in from the spirit. And commonly it's up to the Uratha, the werewolves, to create a balance and stop that corruption from occurring.
Well, it's more than that, and if anything, I think it represents a better representation of maybe some of the things that Werewolf the Apocalypse was maybe going down the line of. If there's a buzzword to use, what that describes Werewolf the Forsaken, which I've had to use in some about the subtle corruption from the spirit world into our world, but it's also about how our world can subtly corrupt the spirit world, and that creates feedback loops. And to explain the word sustainability with regard to the modern world, is that if you want to do something that can benefit you economically, it is designated sustainable if you can do that without causing a loss in your social environment or in your environmental environment. And so, in other words, to be sustainable, you can gain in one area without really diminishing the others. And I think Werewolf of the Forsaken really highlights that, because you're trying to keep all these things in balance. You're trying to keep the spirit world, the mortal world in balance, and you want to improve your territory. I mean, that's the key thing about, if there's one thing that is key to playing Forsaken, and people really, I think, get lost on what the initial game focuses on, and why it is again, it's a game of personal horrors. You are a pack of werewolves looking after what is really a small patch of territory, and so your worries are not about huge global corporations going about polluting the seas and the oceans and tearing down forests. You're about that guy down the road who is coming back week after week, fly tipping, who's just illegally disposing of trash on your land, and how that is then influencing the spirit world and the mortal world in turn. Or how, this crazy spirit that's kind of just passed through your territory has driven all the other spirits mad, and then in turn has caused, weird fires to happen in and around the town where your characters are, or accidents to occur, or for there to be increase in knife crime. It's about that's how I play Forsaken anyway. I've had the joy of running in 4 sessions, but that was my whole idea. It's about territory, and it's very different to. I would say it's definitely a smaller scale game to Forsaken, but you're telling kind of a similar story. It's just the scale of the story you're telling.
Now, moving on from that, even we have Mage, which I feel that Mage of the Ascension was really good at keeping those very punk elements itself. It was a game about libertarians, basically. And then, as we go on to Mage the Awakening, we have these new Gnostic elements, this new, very mysterious world to explore. And personally, I'm a little hesitant to call it Gnosticism Gothic itself, but it does provide a very interesting place to tell such Gothic stories. These characters, these mages, are going into the unknown, and the opponents that they're facing are almost always more powerful than them, and have existed for aeons.
Mage Ascension is about postmodernism, really. I mean, it's hard. You've got these groups rebelling against the modernistic ideal of a global world, and also old Mage the Ascension initially, before you got towards before a revised came out, and a lot of the books later in revised, you could see the shift towards what they've really presented in Awakening, away from this idea of it was about magic versus science, and it's more about freedom versus control. Now, Mage the Awakening, from the outset, is about freedom versus control, and about power versus it's about hubris, in that sense, because you have these cool powers and not going down that route. And so it's Gothic in that sense, because you are so capable of being the tools of your own demise. The other thing in Mage the Awakening I've noticed, I highlighted when someone asked me about Mage the Awakening and they'd played Mage the Ascension, I explained to them that the Free Council, if the Free Council had accepted, there's a line in the Awakening book that says the Free Council wanted liberty, not technocracy, because they were offered to join the Seers of the Throne. So I see Mage the Awakening actually as a alternate universe to Mage the Ascension, where in Mage the Ascension the Exarchs fully closed the cage of reality, and so totally rewrote history in doing so, and got rid of the orders and everything, and the only remnants of magic that persisted were the traditions. Whereas in Mage the Awakening, the Free Council obviously rebelled and didn't want technocracy, and so the cage of reality is imperfect and the orders still exist, and the Free Council, whereas in Mage the Ascension, the technocracy uses science to control the world. That is their tool. In Mage the Awakening, the Free Council realizes that even though the Cage of Reality cuts them off from the supernal realms and the powers it gives them, the Cage of Reality itself has rules and powers that they can manipulate, which never existed before when the Exarchs came to power, and they can use those against the Exarchs. So that's my view on how the two games connect together.
Well, Chris, I know something you really want to discuss is how can you bring in some of the, I want to say, action-packed kind of ideas to the more gothic storytelling of the New World of Darkness, because there's definitely people that enjoy looking at the kind of, I don't know, I want to say epic battles to gritty street punk that you might find in the Old World of Darkness, and they kind of miss that when they look at the new stuff. So why don't you discuss that a little bit?
Where would I begin with that? The first thing I would do always, if you are going to go down a route of playing a game which is that is at a very high scale, or at least a high tier. So your characters, if they're involved in very high action kind of stories, they will have a lot of influence on the world. I would still start with elements of the stories where they are rooted very firmly in the mundane, and so you make those stories about their preparations before going into these high action adventure phases of the story. That way you have a sense of where they are within the world, and you then can also see how their actions have consequences either way, what sacrifices they make before they go into these operations, and what reactions there are afterwards. I mean, it's actually really, I would say it's not difficult to do high action adventure in a gothic horror setting. The important thing is to remember that there are always consequences, and that is where you can drive in the gothic and the personal horror, is that it doesn't matter if they're facing down some, demon from the outer reaches and it's been terrorized an entire city block, and the only way to just take it out is to blow up the entire city block. That's fine, but always remember what are the consequences of those actions, and that will magnify the horror that they've been up against, and mean that the horror has repercussions, and even will eventually in some way corrupt the people that have been fighting against it. I mean, that's one of the key features of, I would say, gothic horror storytelling, is the pervasive idea of some form of corruption, however it manifests. That's where I would start. Then the type of stories I would go for, this kind of style, I don't know, I would say one of the best kind of films that would kind of be best recast in New World of Darkness is a film, say, like Ronin. It's full of gunfights and car chases, but still it all takes place with really horrible cars going through really bad winding streets in some horrible bit of Europe, and it still feels gritty and modern, and it kind of just pulls it back and makes it feel more tangible, rather than just a witty one-liner Arnold Schwarzenegger style before you blow up the thing that has multiple eyes and tentacles. That's not really gothic. That isn't gothic horror. I think you can still have action, but it's presenting it in the right manner, I would say. Why would you think on that one, Mike?
No, I think that was a good place to end, actually. Just kind of trail off. Went pretty well with no planning.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. All right. I'm calling it. So.
That was great. Cool.
Yeah, it was. So, if you'd like to get in touch with us here at Darker Days Radio, you can shoot us an email over at darkerdaysradio@gmail.com. if you want to get more episodes, definitely subscribe through iTunes. And you can also look at episodes beyond the previous 20 if you go to darkerdays.tk and check out our episodes there. Or you can also download a torrent over at Legit Torrents for the Season 1 episodes. And actually, Season 2 will eventually be a torrent pretty soon. Darker Days is also on Facebook, facebook.com/darkerdaysradio. And we're also on twitter.com/darkerdaysradio.
And I would say if people want to chat about this episode and other ones, they could always go over to the World of Darkness news, which wadnews.net, which is a community for the online game. But there is a little part of their forum, which is our world, which is you'll find it under not the sewer, underground radio, and I guess people can discuss previous episodes there, ask questions, suggest things that we can talk about, any secret frequencies, or just tell us if we're wrong.
Yep. All right. That's it. This is Mike signing off.
And this is Chris going back to hell.
All right.